It's wonderful to see you all here. I hope you're really looking forward to this debate. We're very excited. I'm Charlie from the Christian Union, David, and from the Atheist Society, and we're really excited about tonight. We just wanted to make you aware that we as the Christian Union, there's some slides behind, there's some flyers going around, also have a week. Maybe you're thinking things through, you're from the Atheist Society and you're not really sure what Christians believe. Do come along to such things. I think you've got an equivalent week?
Week after next we've got our Reason Week of events, so we've got 5 events during the week after next. And Jonathan will be giving a talk for us on the Tuesday, that's February the 9th.
Yeah, I'll win debates when I only have myself.
Flat win.
Yeah. And our weekly events are every Monday at 7 or 7:30 p.m. We're normally in the Nuffield Theatre. So if you're interested at all in tonight's event, then maybe join our Facebook group and have a look at what events we have on during the year, and everybody's more than welcome to join us.
Yeah. I think the only safety thing is that there are fire exits down the side. And now we'd like to hand over to Bradley, who's going to be chairing the debate for us.
Yeah, once again, thank you very much to everyone for being here this evening, and a special thank you to our guest speakers. Our motion this evening is God required for morality? So speaking for the yes side of that motion is Miriam and Peter, and speaking for the no side is Jonathan and Boaz. So, just a quick few words about the format of the debate this evening. Each side will get a 7-minute opening speech, which will be followed by a 5-minute rebuttal speech for each side, and concluding the first part of the debate with a 5-minute concluding speech from each side. Then we'll launch into questions from you, the audience. We'll have that for several minutes, and then we'll finish with a 5-minute closing speech from each side. So, without further ado, I'd like to invite the first speaker from the yes side of the debate to lead us off. So is it Miriam starting first?
Yeah.
Excellent. Off you go.
Cool. So without a God, there would be no good, no right, and no wrong. To put it in syllogistic form, 1, if objective moral duties exist, then a God exists. 2, objective moral duties do exist, and so 3, therefore a God exists. Moral values are either objective, that is independent of the subject, or subjective, not independent of, but relative to the subject. Moral objectivism claims that there are moral truths that don't depend upon our belief in them. For instance, one culture may believe in cannibalism and another may believe cannibalism is wrong. In order to argue that at least one of these cultures is wrong, one must be a moral objectivist. The objectivist needn't claim to know which culture is wrong to claim at least one of them is wrong. Suppose one group of people thinks the sun goes around the earth and the other thinks the opposite. Science wouldn't say, these are equally true claims, but rather, at least one of these contradictory claims is wrong. Our coming to know that the earth goes around the sun was a matter of discovering truth, not inventing truth. In the same manner, moral objectivists see ethics as a matter of discovering objective moral facts about right and wrong. They are valid and binding whether anyone believes in them or not. The example of the dispute of the earth rotating around the sun illustrates the point that just because people disagree about something doesn't mean there's no fact to the matter. Moral objectivism is often charged with being dangerous because it causes us to condemn other moral outlooks and enforces its own outlook on us without tolerance for difference. This objection is wrong because it confuses objectivism with absolutism. Objectivism says there are objective moral values. Absolutism is the claim to know absolutely what is right and wrong, and is sometimes accompanied by the idea that those who disagree should be forced to toe the line. In fact, it is moral subjectivism that is dangerous because it eliminates moral debate between different cultures and people. Human quarrelling or debate presupposes a shared set of norms without which debate would be impossible. Quarrelling means trying to show that the other person is wrong. A subjectivist viewing the Nazi atrocities could not say it was worse than a liberal society, and therefore could not object or interfere with that regime on moral grounds. They could only interfere or object on non-moral grounds, e.g., we don't like that and we're stronger than you, which isn't a good moral reason. Furthermore, anyone condemning intolerance is appealing to an objective moral value that we objectively ought to be tolerant. If they are appealing to an objective moral value, then they are being self-contradictory. If you value tolerance, embrace moral objectivism. Subjectivism also makes it impossible to criticize others since we've made right and wrong a matter of personal preference. This means practically that the Westerner who judges female circumcision to be wrong, and yet says, it's wrong of you to judge, ends up condemning themselves. It's only if we reject moral relativism that we are free to promote tolerance and open-mindedness. Furthermore, great moral reforms have come about when one person or group of people has stood out against the ethical assumptions of their generation, and by doing so, have not just changed things, but changed them for the better. The abolition of the slave trade came about because people believed it to be objectively wrong and worked to convince other people of this truth. But if subjectivism is accepted, then the change from a society that traded people to a society that didn't trade people was not progress, because for the subjectivist, there is no such thing as moral progress, only change. Our moral intuitions tell us that it's wrong to torture a baby for fun. I have a number of basic moral intuitions about the Holocaust and the slave trade. I needn't be an absolutist about these claims. My intuitions could be wrong, but if it's possible to have mistaken moral intuitions, then moral objectivism is true. And finally, if objective moral values exist, a God exists. For morality to be objective, it cannot be rooted in finite persons, but must transcend both individual and corporate humanity. As C.S. Lewis states, the law of right and wrong must be something above and beyond the facts of human behaviour, a real law which we did not invent and which we know we ought to obey. However, because objective morality prescribes and obligates our behaviour, it must be rooted in something personal, since only persons can obligate and prescribe behaviour. This is incompatible with a naturalistic worldview, because a command only makes sense when there are two minds involved, one giving the command and one receiving the command. Nature doesn't give commands because it doesn't have a mind in that sense. Atheists, of course, can be good, but only because God exists. Morality isn't a superficial feature of this world. Things bear the moral properties good or bad, insofar as they resemble God. Being God's image bearer means that atheists can recognize the same moral truths as the theist, because this faculty is given to him by God. Theists readily admit that non-believers can know moral truths, but knowing, epistemology, must be distinguished from being, ontology, the latter being the more fundamental. Epistemologically, the atheist is right to say that they can recognize that they are endowed with dignity, conscious, rights, duties, and the basic capacity to recognize right from wrong. It's no surprise that non-theists know the same sort of moral truths as believers. Ontologically, however, a non-theistic explanation of the roots of this knowledge is inadequate. Why think impersonal, valueless processes such as natural selection would produce valuable, rights-bearing persons? The more plausible metaphysical context for grounding human rights and dignity and morality is this: we have been created with a moral constitution by a supremely valuable being, and we are hardwired to function properly by living moral, relational lives. So if humans have intrinsic rather than instrumental value, the deeper, more natural explanation is a personal, supremely valuable God, as a source of goodness and creator of morally responsible agents. If intrinsic value does not exist from the outset of evolutionary processes, its emergence from non-valuable processes is difficult to explain. It doesn't matter how many non-personal and non-valuable components we happen to stack up, from valuelessness comes. The naturalist position offers no good reason to think that valuable, morally responsible human beings should emerge from valueless processes. Theism offers a far more plausible context for human value and morality, which flows readily from a wise, supremely valuable being to that being's valuable image bearers.
I'd like to thank Miriam for that excellent speech, and now I'd like to invite the first speaker from the no side of the debate to open their case. Just a reminder of the motion, for those of you who have joined us a little bit late. The motion this evening is God required for morality?
I'd just like to say before I start, thank you very much to everyone for turning up. It's awesome to see so many interested people in this age-old debate, so that's really, really cool. Thanks to you guys for organising it and sharing it, and also we are debate virgins, right? So these guys know what they're talking about in a kind of experiential way, so good luck us. Just bear with us, be nice. Okay, so is God required for morality? The simple answer is no. Capuchins, bonobos and other primates certainly don't require God to exhibit moral behaviour. descriptively, nor do non-theists. In fact, in the biggest ever survey of philosophers, they were split pretty much three ways between consequentialism, which is belief that morality is derived from the consequences of an action, virtue ethics, which is the idea that humans flourish as humans, and that's how you derive your moral value, and deontology, that there is some objective basis for morality, whether that be some Platonic realm or some other such way. Now, none of these paths require God. Indeed, divine command theory is the only ethical framework that really needs God, and that is adhered to by a tiny minority of philosophers overall. Philosophers have been having this debate for thousands of years, and collectively they've come to pretty much dismiss divine command theory apart from those who are theistic, which is actually only 14% of philosophers. Now, on DCT, divine command theory, the idea that God commands actions and they are good because God commands them, I have some dozen or so problems with that theory, and I'm happy to share them at the end, but this is a massive sort of area of philosophy, so we probably don't have time to go through everything, which is a real shame, because we need to build our own case as well as topple theirs, obviously. So how do we create a coherent moral framework without God? Well, we clearly do, because we can see that humans are clearly moral without needing to refer to God. And often, when they do refer to God in various societies around the world, we cringe with moral embarrassment or horror. Think of the Christian right in the United States, or if not, then the Islamic fundamentalists of ISIS. Morality is, as far as we're concerned, built up out of psychologies, empathy and rationality. Roughly speaking, and by looking at empirical data, when we are being emotional and intuitive, some claim that we are often non-consequentialist, so it's more rule-based. But when we are rational and use our deliberative faculties, we are more consequentialist. Indeed, some 90%, and this is 90% of you guys in experiments, doesn't matter what your beliefs are, would pull the lever in the famous trolley experiment. So you would kill one person instead of 5. But it turns out that percentage is swapped when you have to push a fat man over the bridge to stop the trolley, not to kill the 5 people. So morality is clearly, it's morally psychological or psychologically moral. We are as beings. We can drop a bomb to kill 80,000 by pulling a lever much more easily than shooting a single person in the head. So empathy and emotions and feelings are super, super important for morality, and without them, it's defunct. So if God wanted us to be moral creatures, why has he given us 2 systems which work to different ends? So Daniel Kahneman, the psychologist, would call this system 1 and system 2, our intuitive versus our rational. Why has he allowed whole subsets of people to have dysfunctional empathy systems who find it far more difficult to be ordinarily moral? Now, I've taught certain autistic children who literally cannot be particularly moral in many ways that you'd see because they have dysfunctional empathy systems. They can't put themselves out in their own bodies in a sort of abstract way. So, of course, morality and altruism make perfect sense within the context of evolutionary biology and psychology. Morality is a functional thing in social species. We see this in other species and we see it in ourselves. Interestingly, it appears that even though theists hate consequentialism as a, quote, and this comes from Peter's previous debating partner, William Lane Craig, a terrible ethic, they and God are both consequentialists. All theodicies, now this is answers to why there's so much evil and suffering in the world, given that there's an omni-God that exists, use a line something like, there must be a greater good when faced with whatever bad there is. Now this is at heart a consequentialist approach. Whether it's, because we have free will, it allows us to have free will, builds our soul, or a tsunami killing 240,000 people, or Noah's flood killing all of humanity bar 8 and all the ecosystems of the world, there is some unknown proposed greater good that comes about. Now, that is consequentialist. The moral grounding of that is grounded outside of God. So God himself doesn't need God for his own morality. And actions within whole swathes of the Bible, history, present reality, including the very sacrifice of Jesus, who was used instrumentally to atone for the wrongs of humans, he was being used instrumentally, consequentialist. So it's actually worse than this, because the Bible does actually give reasons for bad things, like the slaughter of the Canaanites and the Amalekites. And these are clearly not good enough justifications. If you read them in the Bible, wow, justifying genocide, no, that's just, it's not done very well. And besides, how does anyone know whether their God is the right grounder of morality? There are even more levels of wrong to this whole moral argument. This pragmatic uselessness is well defined in the argument from divine miscommunication. There are some 42,000 different denominations of Christianity in the world. all claiming their own right to moral rectitude. So you need to ground any position normally in either an axiom, a self-evident truth, a circle, or an infinite regress. The axiom is usually what's preferred to ground anything. So with consequentialism, the non-derivative currency for moral value is often seen as happiness, pleasure, or well-being, because it's self-evidently good. So what this jargon all means is basically when you keep asking why you did that, why you did that, why you did that, eventually you get to something like, because it makes me happy. Why is that good? Because it's self-evidently good. It's good that I'm happy, it's good that we're happy, we enjoy being happy. However, when you do that with theists, they end up with, well, because God. So that cannot appeal to moral reasoning. Why did you do that? Why God? And that ends the conversation. And so as an axiom, God I don't think is good enough to ground morality. But if you want to appeal to moral reasoning, then you have to appeal to reasons outside of God, so you don't need God. So grounding morality merely becomes an arbitrary pastime for these two. To argue, as our opponents do, that morality is objective and grounded in God creates a problem. Immanuel Kant claimed that humans couldn't access the Sinn an dich, the thing in itself. We are all experiencing machines, and everything we experience we do subjectively. So even if there are objective moral rules or whatever out there, we still have to subjectively analyse them and interpret them through our filters. So it really doesn't matter whether there is objective morality or not. It's what we do. Finally, morality is an abstract idea. I'm a conceptual nominalist, you can ask me about that later. Abstract ideas do not exist other than in the conceiving mind of the agent. If all sentient beings died, there would be no morality. So we clearly construct morality from the world around us as a concept without ontic reality. It doesn't exist as in some ether. In the same way that we might look at a picture and create concepts of aesthetic beauty in our minds using our conceptual frameworks, we build up moral evaluations of actions. Is that picture objectively beautiful? No, it does not have properties of beauty. It has properties, natural properties, to which we conceptually apply beauty. And the same is with morality. We apply our framework to actions such as emotions, rationality, and empathy. Sorry for hogging 20 seconds.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for that excellent speech. Now I'd like to invite Peter to open the rebuttal stage of this debate for the side arguing that God is required for morality.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to add my thanks to the organisers, and it's great to see the Atheist Society and the CU Society coming together on the sort of neutral ground, as it were, of the debating society, and all collaborating to organise this. So I'm very happy to be here to take part. Miriam laid out our argument for connecting belief in a God to belief in objective morality, with simply two premises leading to a conclusion that follows from it. One part of that argument, of course, is belief that there is such a thing as objective moral duties, moral values, and so on, that are discovered rather than invented. And it seemed to me that I caught from what Jonathan was saying at the end there, that he only really started addressing that issue right at the end of his opening speech, where he started talking about Kantian epistemology and the way in which we as subjects apply our notions to things in the world in order to judge them. And I think I got the sense that he was saying we kind of project our subjective notions of things onto the world, and that things outside of us as subjects don't really bear these properties, including moral properties and properties of beauty objectively. If I've misunderstood him, I'm sure they'll be able to come back and correct that misunderstanding later. So I think they were questioning the objectivity of value. If they are doing that, I think there are significant problems with doing that, not only in going against just basic moral intuitions of the kind that Miriam talked about, but the way in which it would actually undermine the very notion of debate and rationality, that it would take away the grounds for doing that. And in a sense you'd be saying, here's an argument for why you should believe that there are no objective moral values. But if there are no objective moral values, then there's no objective should to why I ought to believe that conclusion, or why I indeed ought to pay respectful attention to an argument for that conclusion, which would undermine the grounds for making such an argument in the first place. So I'd be interested to see a response to that issue. On the other side of the ledger, as it were, was a premise connecting, saying that if there are these objective moral values, they must be somehow grounded in God, and there was a lot there to go through. I think the important things to highlight would be to say we're not necessarily espousing the divine command theory, which would say something is good or bad simply because God says so. Rather, we would take an essentialist position that says that God's essential and necessary character is itself the good, as Plato would have said, that God's character defines what is good and what is bad, and that God, of course, issues commands in line with his character, and those commands explain the prescriptive nature of morality as we experience it, and the fact that character and those commands come from a personal source are also able to explain the obligatory nature of morality. We can't be prescribed or obligated to something that is non-personal, something impersonal. So a personal ground of moral obligation and prescription that is itself essentially necessarily good rather than arbitrary, I think does give a coherent grounding to the understanding of morality. Kant's epistemology, I think, is self-contradictory anyway, because he says of the thing itself that we can't know anything about the thing itself, but that, of course, is a claim to know something about the thing itself. Animals, they might sometimes exhibit behaviour that falls in line with our notions of morality, but I don't think animals are really moral creatures. When the lion eats the lamb, it eats the lamb, but it doesn't murder the lamb, and you don't put the lion on trial for doing it. So I that's fine. But then talking about evolutionary roots of empathy and psychology and so on, that's all talking about moral epistemology, and we can grant as much as you like about moral epistemology, and we can come up with moral theories that are coherent that don't mention God, but that's all moral epistemology. The real question on the table here is, however it is that we come to know about or to discover these moral truths and duties, what explains their existence, what best explains the nature of our moral experience, of these moral facts that we discover rather than invent. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Peter for his excellent speech, and now I'd like to invite Boaz to continue the case for the no side of this debate.
Okay. Sure, I'll just go. Sure. So one thing I was going to say about her claim at the start. Miriam, sorry. I'm terrible with names. Anyway. Jonathan, yeah. So about her argument at the start that if objective morals exist, then God exists. One, I have a problem with that premise. I can actually grant that objective morals could exist, but a God necessarily doesn't have to exist to be the cause of those objective morals. So I could take on a Platonic ideal. I could be kind of supernatural and say there exist Platonic ideals, so there exists a Platonic ideal of the good that's separate from this universe, or whatever, or related, and there just is goodness. And I could say that exists forever or whatever. And what I mean by good is anything that resembles that. So I don't even need to posit a God, and Plato didn't really need to. I could even posit something closer to what Buddhists believe and about karma. I can even say we live in a karmistic universe, and I don't need to really invoke any God. I can just say, yeah, there are objective morals outside of my brain, and I can use this other supernatural explanation, and I don't have to evoke God. So I kind of do not accept the validity of the first premise.
I think, can I add something there? Because I think actually objective is a bit of a problem because no one's really defined it.
You haven't really
someone like Walter Sinner Armstrong is a moral philosopher who says objective morality exists, but it exists in the fact that we causing harm to others is objectively bad, like, as in that there is harm and we can test the amount of harm, and in that the objectivity of morality is grounded in the consequences, which. And
also, I could say like it's objective in a sense, but not separate from us, in the fact that we all have roughly the same sensations, emotions, and mental faculties that help us construct the same idea of morality. So I could say it exists subjectively in that kind of way. We all have a kind of idea of what is moral. pretty much the same.
I think there was a conflation as well with subjectivism and relativism.
Yeah.
So subjectivism isn't relativism. You can have a subjective, universal moral system. So that if we all morality, if we conceptually abstract ideas don't exist, if all our minds were kaput, abstract ideas wouldn't exist. So our minds construct abstract ideas. Morality is abstract. So, but the things to which it refers are natural properties which do exist. And so,
we're all talking about the same thing when we mean moral.
Yeah, so I think there was some confusion with subjectivism and relativism there. But I want to look at also, you were talking about essentialism, which is basically divine command theory in another.
Yeah, I was in fact going to say this.
Because what the divine command theory is, it has an answer to the thart dilemma, which is that are things good because God is good, or in which case because God commands them, type thing, or are they good outside of God?
Good, yeah.
So what people like Peter will say is, well, actually they're good because of God's nature. So they take it one step back, but it's exactly the same thing. So if God's nature is just good, then it's arbitrary, and you can't apply moral reasoning to any moral action. You have to say, why is that good? Because God. And you say, why is rape bad? He can't tell us why rape is bad. I can tell you it's because it harms the other person intentionally. He has to say, because as soon as he says because and then starts appealing to moral reasoning, it's grounded in moral reasoning.
Yeah.
So he has to say because God, it's essential. But then how does he know that? How does he know the character of God without revelation? So then he has to look at things like the Bible, and the Bible is pretty ambivalent about rape. In fact, it actually sort of commands it in a number of places. Yeah. So before you say I suggest you read the Old Testament.
I got a quote here. If you want.
Yeah, I suggest you read the Old Testament. So the slaughter of the Amalekites, you can take the woman and as you want them.
And in Leviticus, that if should a man rape a maid who isn't promised or wed to anybody, that you should marry her.
Yeah, they're forced marriage. If a man rapes a woman, rather than being punished for it, they have to be forced marriage.
Absolutely, that's the only mention of rape in the entire Bible.
So if you're talking about essentialism, then actually you can't morally judge. In fact, God can't judge himself. Because if you to ask God, why are you good? All God could say is God.
Yeah, because I'm God.
Because you can't defer to moral reasoning. And this is the whole problem with the position, is that they cannot defer to moral reasoning. It is one of the fundamental problems with divine command theory and this kind of essentialism. Yeah. So whereas we would defer to consequentialism, the consequences of an action in some manner, we'll say that causes harm, and we can measure that using scientific inductive techniques. We have really good reason why that's a bad thing to do. That society would suffer, yada yada yada. They can't do that, or if they do, it means that they're using several techniques, but also they haven't answered how God is also consequentialist and so on.
Yeah. Excellent. I'd like to thank Jonathan and Boaz for their excellent rebuttal, and I'd now like to invite the speakers from the yes side of the debate to conclude this section before the Q&A session.
Yeah, I know. I kind of was smart enough to write the point.
I think you failed to even start to address one of the main points I made, which is that humans have objective moral value. Well, not just objective moral value, but we have values as human beings. We have intrinsic instead of instrumental. No, I don't recall that. But anywho,
I'll go into further detail right afterwards.
Okay, cool. But anyway, you said that we didn't have an answer to rape is bad, which I just found baffling. Rape is bad because humans have intrinsic moral worth, and we're made in the image of a valuable, infinitely valuable being. And if we're made in his image, that means we're all infinitely valuable. And if you really, honestly, if you take God out of the equation, I think what you're left with is Darwinism. And I think everyone should read Darwin for themselves, because what Darwin had to say was that your value is based on how much you have adapted to your environment. So the smarter person is more valuable than a less smart person. He even used it to justify racism, but that's besides the point. Not every human being had value. We only had value if we could perform in some way. With God, that's not the case. It doesn't matter how well you perform, it doesn't matter how intelligent you are, it doesn't matter how beautiful you are. It's not about survival of the fittest. It's you're mine, you belong to me, and therefore you have infinite value, and it doesn't really depend on anything you do. I don't think he has an answer to why you can have intrinsic human rights without God. Like, I took a moral philosophy lecture in first year, and the first thing the lecturer said is we have to assume human rights. You had to assume it because you can't ground it in anything to do with Darwinism or naturalism.
you continue.
I'll just come in very, very briefly, just to say, trying to ground ethics in scientifically measurable data, I think gets you into the classic is-ought problem. This is the way Sam Harris tries to go in his recent book. And of course, you face the question, okay, well, you can measure that if I torture a baby for fun, it causes certain dysfunctions within the operation of that organism. But why? But then you have to bring in a moral evaluation of that description of reality to have an evaluation of it. So you do face the regress, whereas when you're talking about, you say, well, opinion to God's nature is arbitrary. Well, of course, if God's nature is essentially and necessarily what it is, God is, by definition, the greatest possible being who exists necessarily. On that kind of account of essentialism, God is the least arbitrary thing there is.
Why is God
in reality? Well, every moral thing is going to have a buck stop somewhere, or ultimate stopping point. Once you get to, it's a necessary truth. To ask the question, well, why is that necessary truth true? Is to misunderstand the nature of the object that you're questioning. God is the greatest possible being, the being of maximal value, the maximally beautiful possible thing that there is. God is descriptive of the good. It's like asking, why is the Platonic ideal of the good good? Is it assessed by some other, further Platonic ideal behind that? But a Platonic ideal, apart from being an abstract object, which Johnny doesn't think exists anyway, how does it explain? Again, back to the obligatory or the prescriptive nature of morality as we experience when an abstract object is an impersonal reality.
Yeah. So, I literally have so many things to say, but there was an interesting, you started talking about how we have intrinsic value, and you said the goodness is grounded in the fact that rape is wrong because we have intrinsic value in the image of God. But you don't answer the question, why is it bad to devalue a human being? And this is a point that I can keep asking the why. See, it sounds self-evidently like bad, doesn't it? But you have to use either moral reasoning gets you so far and so far. And actually, Peter is right. Every claim made, and this applies to every claim you make as well. So it's funny that you say it's arbitrary because it gets back to some sort of starting point. But actually, every claim does. Every claim, it's called Munchausen's trilemma. Every claim either has a circular, in which case it's pretty unsound because you just, I believe that because that, why do you believe that because that, or an infinite regress, which is really problematic because it carries on going forever, or you have an axiom. An axiom is a self-evident truth, and you just have to ground something in an axiom. Now, we are grounding our moral system in the axiom of happiness, pleasure is good, pain is bad. Right? If you don't get a better non-derivative currency in the world, they don't have that. No. They defer to, well, God is good. Necessarily, God is good. It's this bare assertion that comes out of nothing. Well, how do you know? He says nothing about rape. How do you know rape isn't actually good? We know it's not good because it harms people.
And how do you even know his essential qualities? How do you know he's not a liar? His essential qualities would just be good if there is essential qualities. How do you know he isn't a liar? How do you know he isn't hateful? How do you know he isn't vengeful?
Without appealing to moral
without appealing
reasoning.
To something else. You've got to appeal to something else.
I guess by definition, if he was a liar or if he was evil, then he wouldn't be God anymore.
Well, no, that doesn't make any sense. Hang on a minute. How does that make any sense?
Can I just say...
No, hang on a minute. You just said that the definition of good is God and his qualities. I said, what if his qualities were different? And you said he wouldn't be God. What does that mean? That doesn't make any sense.
How do you know that he would
his
have
quality? Your position is his qualities. The fact that he's God makes his qualities good. So if I say if he's a liar or whatever, you've just got to say.
Let me put that into an example. So this is the example that's often used. The direction of causality for this approach is that God is good and God has lovingness, mercy, and justice and all these things, but they are not intrinsically valuable. This is their position because this is an established position that's been critiqued. So the direction of causality is God is good, he has these things, and just by him having them, they are essentially good. but you can't actually say loving. So if I gave a homeless person £5, you're homeless, I'll give you £5. I'm giving that to you because I actually want you to use that and to make the world a better place in some small way. I'm using moral reasoning, it'll make you happy, blah, blah, blah. But that kindness, if you're a theist, that kindness is merely a reflection of God, and that's it. I can't use moral reasoning to say why that was a good thing. All I can say it's reflective of God, and the property just becomes a reflectiveness of God. And incidentally, on Satan, if God is omnipotent, before you all clap Satan, whoa. God is omnipotent. Satan is God's middle manager, because if God wanted to get rid of Satan, he could do it like that.
Absolutely.
The fact that Satan in hell exists means that he's managing it on behalf of God. So before you clap anything to do with Satan, know that Satan is there by the will of God if you believe in Satan.
Yeah, otherwise omnipotence doesn't make a damn bit of sense.
But as for animals, actually most moral philosophers and moral psychologists and biologists will agree that there's a sliding scale of morality which is dependent on awareness. So when you were talking about lions, we actually know lots of stuff about the morality. If you look at Frans de Waal and his work on the fairness in capuchin monkeys, and they get really, really annoyed about unfairness and this kind of stuff. We know loads about the functional use of dogs of loads of animals. So you're just absolutely wrong there on animals not being moral. There is a sliding scale though. Yeah. Is that over or 1 minute? You've got 1 minute left.
Oh.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'd say it's grounded also in things like, you say, what is it grounded in? It is grounded in human capacities and human emotions. That's what it's grounded in. And we all have exactly the same ones. So you say, what makes an action good? Our rationality and our empathy tells us that action is good. I don't really have to...
Here's an example, Hitler, genocide, bad. God, Amalekite genocide, Canaanite genocide, good.
Exactly.
How do you ground that? We know that genocide is bad, and we use moral reasoning to do that. Sorry, I don't mean to say that derogatively. Christians have to take that as being good because God commanded it as part of his, as an outpouring of his essence. Yeah. Okay. So unless you're going to defer to moral reasoning for that, then that is necessarily good in some way. And if you're going to say it's good for a greater good, then actually you're grounding your morality in consequentialism. The Bible is jam-packed full of consequentialism. God is the ultimate consequentialist. Yeah. Why did God kill all of humanity bar 8 in Noah's flood if it wasn't for a greater good? And as theists, you are...
I'd like to thank all of the speakers so far in the debate for their speeches. We now move on to half an hour's question time. So, members of the audience, I'd like to remind you of the motion for this debate, which is God required for morality? So if your questions could be sort of centred around that motion, that would be excellent. If your questions could be brief, that would also be excellent.
Not Satan.
And I'd also appreciate if the panel could keep their responses to the point. Questions to the audience, please raise your hands. I'll try and get a variety. You, sir?
I propose that God is not even a moral person. He is immoral. For is this not the God who is responsible for the persecution of women, for the persecution of gay people, for the persecution of transgender people? For is he not the God who is evil, who is horrible, who spreads evil around the world? I mean, you know, this God is not a nice God. The Bible is full.
Is there a question there? Because my answer would be yes.
I think you guys need to answer, why is God moral, let alone just, you know?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that question. So, I'm going to put this to the yes side. Is God moral?
On our view, God is the very paradigm and standard of goodness per se. God is essentially and necessarily good. God is loving, just, etc., etc. What you're raising are issues about people's treatment of other people, which some of those people may think is justified through certain readings of theological texts, which one would question whether or not they're correct about that. But your basic point is that you think some of those interpretations are wrong, are evil. This means, I presume, that you think objectively wrong and evil, not just something that you happen not to prefer. So you're granting one of the premises of the moral argument.
Not necessarily.
In raising the objection, if you mean that these mistreatment of transgendered people, etc., is objectively wrong. The comeback question on the point of the debate would be, how do you explain and account for that objective wrong existing? What is the best grounding of it? It needn't necessarily be in a God that you think is revealed in a particular text. I think these theological issues get us off from the main philosophical issue of is a God. The question is the God of the Bible or the God of the Quran or the God of the Book of Mormon necessary for morality, but is at least a God required?
We just have a response from the notes of this debate first.
Well, I was just going to say you have to posit a God of doctrine. Like, otherwise, what the hell are you positing? You know, you're saying, a God is required. We're not sure which, and we're not sure what he says, and we're not sure what the hell the moral.
And then you say, he must have goodness. Well, I don't know what goodness looks like because it's not been revealed. But so therefore, I'm going to use moral reasoning to find what goodness is. My question was going to be, how do you know what goodness is? If you said God necessarily has goodness, that's just saying God has godness. That's all that means. It has no meaning. You are just merely circularly arguing or asserting
and also, who's
something that is lacking in meaning.
If you're not prescribing a God of doctrine, whose godness? Each God has different kind of godliness. Each God is prescribing different morals. So that gets us nowhere. You are saying a God.
To wrap up your man's question here is,
and also my God, I'm just saying the Old Testament did command the stoning of homosexuals. So I don't think that is that's something that's mistranslated or misquoted. Flat out says
and adulterers
with a man, stone him.
So we'll have a quick wrap up and then
what you're saying there is objective grounding, or at least it's grounded in action. Both of our positions are going to be grounded in actions because you can't ground anything other than unless you want to go on and on forever. So or actually you're grounding in a circular argument, I think, almost with God is good, what is good, God is good. So I think we are grounding it in something that's real and tangible that we all feel, which is pain and pleasure. And we all know that pleasure is good and pain is bad. Right? I'm not talking necessarily about hedonistic pleasure here. I'm talking about that pleasure of happiness and well-being.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything that feels good and everything.
So you have very good grounding. Talking about moral currency or a currency for a value system. These are value systems. Like aesthetics has a currency, beauty, and whatever unit beauty you like. Our unit of moral currency is pain and pleasure.
Thank you. We'll just have a very, very quick follow-up and then a short response and then next question.
You actually led me quite nicely onto the second part.
Very quickly.
You say that some people, I don't, you almost essentially said, I don't interpret the Bible like the other people interpret the Bible. So then, how should we interpret the Bible?
Thank you. How should we interpret the Bible?
Thank you. In one particular way,
very quick response. Thank you very much.
Using your own morals to make that interpretation.
Thank you. We'll have a very quick follow-up and then next question. We want to get as many questions in as possible.
If you want to know more about how we interpret the Bible, come back next week and we'll talk about the Bible.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the next question now. So I'm going to go over the gentleman in the turquoise bluish jumper.
Hi, thank you so much again. That was very helpful to getting the point. This is a question from NoTam. Two questions really. One a quick one and one slightly more extensive. The first question is, if you think that morality is a sliding scale and subjective, then actually for animals, for example, you think we should let animals on trial and have prisons for animals? Do you think that would be appropriate? Second question.
Well, actually, can we just do one at a time, because otherwise it will get confusing. Yeah. Right. So what's interesting in moral psychology is we look at children as actually a better example. So when a 2-year-old does something to manipulate a mother, they're actually using intention and outcomes to arrive at an intentional goal. Now, we don't scold them in the same way we do a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 15-year-old. And what we have is a sliding scale of morality in humans. So you can forget other animals. We have that in humans. And this is why we have adulthood. But that's just an arbitrary line drawn. If you know anything about the Socrates paradox, it's just an example of the Socrates paradox, where you have to draw an arbitrary line down for a continuum. Now, we have this continuum in humans. But it even exists in adult humans who have different faculties. They have different abilities to, for example, certain autistics, to morally evaluate certain things, and that's based largely on empathy. But children down in moral development. Now, Lawrence Kohlberg has done some really interesting work to say that if you teach children in their moral development, they morally develop much better if you teach them morality with moral reasoning than if you teach it with them with commands. So if you teach a child divine command theory, for example, don't do that, God, because God, or if you actually give them because that's going to harm them, and you teach them empathy, you actually give them empathic skills, then they end up being, on all judgments of morality and psychology, far more better developed moral individuals.
Just the second part of the question quickly, and then we'll have a response.
Okay, the second part of the question is related to the first, which is actually in the absence of God, you're saying that, or Miriam was saying that there can be no objective morality. My question.
I can be good without God, and that's all I need.
Wait, I conceded that when I first
spoke. Yeah, I know.
But we're talking about what the ground.
No, I don't think you need a kind of divine explanation on why he can know what morals are. You can actually have a Darwinian explanation.
I know, but
you cannot have a Darwinian explanation.
Absolutely, you can.
If I hit that gentleman in the face, I know it will hurt him.
Yeah,
and that
because he's empathetic with that.
Wait,
we're very quickly going to have the end of this question.
I didn't get to speak.
We're very quickly going to have the end of this question, and then we're going to have a response.
Apologies. The end of the question was this: in the absence of objective morality, then what do you make of what we get from the no camp? What do you make of, for example, people who thought that when they did a rain dance and when they sacrificed their own children?
They're wrong.
So in that culture, their opinion and what was
they're wrong.
Incomplete knowledge.
Yeah, incomplete knowledge.
Yeah, what was that was good for their society? They felt good, so they sacrificed their own children and did a rain dance.
That's a wrong interpretation of causality.
Obviously, we in society wouldn't say that's barbaric. I would say that would be entirely inappropriate to today's modern society and culture.
Yeah.
In which case, do you just think
they were wrong.
Very quick response.
We can get onto some there's a position called desire utilitarianism, which broadly would say that if your desires are for goodness, then but if I've got incomplete knowledge, at least I'm trying to be good. But of course, this all depends. It depends how you define objective.
Well, they were definitely wrong. The point, what they were doing for the act, for them to think that it was moral, is that it maximised happiness and it was a just act. And I think that's all you really need. I think you need the concept of, this action is good. It increases well-being, and also that this action is just. The person deserves the treatment.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So that's what I'm saying. And the consequences of the action, they were just wrong. They thought that it would, generate rain. They were wrong.
Thank you. We'll have a response from the yes side.
Okay, first of all, you said we could have objective morality or some kind of basis of morality with Darwinism. I wish I'd printed off quotes from him because
I don't care what he said.
If you don't care what he said, how can you claim that you can get morality from him, but you don't bother to read him? Well, from Darwinism, from his theory.
He's no prophet of
developed a long way since Darwin.
He's no prophet.
That's a straw man of evolution to say it equals Darwinism. I mean, he didn't know about genetic drift. He didn't even know about genetics. He didn't know about.
Well,
it's just his assumptions, his theory. I don't care about his opinion.
Let Miriam.
Yeah, please. Can I speak? I'm the only woman on the panel. I keep getting spoken over.
No, you go, sister.
I think
to be honest, the Bible did say.
A woman shouldn't speak. Yeah.
Next
Thank you very much for that.
I think our questioner was raising an interesting issue, if I interpreted him correctly, because he was pointing out that these people were made happy by what they did, but they did something that we think is wrong, and you say, well, yes, they were wrong because they had the incomplete knowledge. They were just factually wrong. Yeah. But doesn't that show that that's an issue of moral epistemology, that they can get wrong, but the theory of doing something because it makes you happy doesn't give you an ontological grounding for what is factually right or wrong.
No,
Thank you. We'll move on to another question.
Because
We want to get as many in as
just
possible.
completely
Thank you. Hands up, please. Questions? Gentleman in the black shirt.
Okay. Previous to Abraham canon, if you will, and this is open to the entire panel. Humanity, depending on how old you believe the Earth is, humanity's around for a lot longer before. How do you explain how humanity was able to survive doing what it was doing without a moral guidance, a moral voice, which not necessarily arguing that it happens in the burning bush or anything like that, or Abraham, but how do you explain morality in Homo sapiens before our understanding of canonical religion?
Thank you. I'd like to address that question to the yes side.
Okay. That's a question of moral epistemology. The moral argument is an argument about moral ontology. So it's an interesting question. I think moral revelation in a religious tradition, if it's true, is useful, perhaps in helping people to know what's right and what's wrong, and in guidance and so on. But our stated position was that you do not need to know about God or believe in God or believe in a particular holy book or whatever in order to know the difference between right and wrong. We think people created in the image of God inherently.
Didn't my question allude to the fact that cavemen and women growing up, there's food, let's kill the food, eat the food, if I kill you over the food. I mean, that is the question, that is what we're talking about, that is morality as we would recognise it today. I'm not saying those people recognised it as morality, but if you're talking about, okay, and I appreciate using these philosophical terms like epistemology as opposed to
ontology.
You have an awful lot of meaning that you understand behind that statement that maybe some of the audience don't understand. So
Are you saying that basically ontology doesn't really matter?
The entire room understands morality. Those people were still acting by working together from in the group ethic. They were acting from a moral standpoint that they might not have attributed to the God, to a higher power.
Thank you. We'll have a response from the yes side, and then we will move on to the no.
Right. So to try and break it down without the fancy terminology, I think all people at whatever stage of history are able to have moral intuitions about what they ought to do and not do, and can know that without believing in a God or a particular revelatory tradition or anything like that. So your Stone Age man knows that it's wrong to murder someone just to nick their necklace or whatever. That's fine. But once you've said, I know that it is objectively, that's a fact, that's something I discover, not something I invent, it doesn't depend on me or us, even if we thought it was okay to murder people for their necklaces, actually we would be wrong. People who believe that sincerely are wrong, and so on. You're saying there's a moral fact out there that I meet in my moral experience that tugs at me, that pushes at me. It says don't do this, do that. I'm obligated to behave in that way before this moral fact. What in reality out there outside of us best explains that fact of experience? And we're saying the thing that best explains it would be a personal thing that can therefore prescribe and obligate, but a personal thing that is transcendent, that is above, that goes beyond individual persons or cultures and our decisions.
Thank you. We'll have a response from the no side.
Yeah, just two very quick things to say. I think you can objectively ground that in the fact that it doesn't matter if our minds exist, in the sense that if you intentionally harm someone, for your own ends or whatever, for no reasonable reason, then that's self-evidently harmful, and if everyone did that in society, we would go down the shiter. Yeah. So, but also use the term obligated. I find it really interesting because actually moral obligation, I think is a really difficult term to use, and I think it's problematic for you because you used it with valid and binding, and you slip these terms in quite often, and you really need to ground out these terms because they're problematic. So obligated and binding means basically if you don't do that something will happen, and it basically just means heaven and hell. In fact, what it turns out is it's circular. Morality, objective morality, has to be binding and valid, which basically means you have to have someone to that's outside of the world obliging you to do something, otherwise you're going to go to heaven or hell. Like, if you take away those terms, obligated and binding, actually you just have our ordinary morality. Can I just give one experiment done by Stephen Mason talking about ordinary morality? So the idea is ordinary morality it presupposes atheism. And here's the example. So very quick. Okay, if you're going to inject a small child with an injection to immunise them, then you're giving them a small pain for a greater good. This is the basis of all theodicies for the problem of evil. There's a greater good to come from all this evil, right? So if you're going to be injected by, you're 5 years old by the way, by a doctor, he's a doctor, he's going to inject you. I'm not going to go over and rugby tackle him and punch him to the ground, because he's going to cause you some harm, because the greater good will necessarily come about. In the same way, if Christians are proper with their moral thesis, they should, if they see you getting beaten up on the other side of the road, you're an old granny and he's beating you up, right? They should not do anything, because they should be obliged to let the greater good come about. This is Stephen Mason's theory. And the greater good coming about, what happens is Christian morality leads to moral paralysis. And morality, ordinary morality, is underwritten by atheism, because atheists ordinarily would not do that, would run and save you. But actually, there can be no gratuitous evil. So if you're being beaten up, that cannot be gratuitous evil. There must be a greater good to come out.
We're just going to have a question for the audience, then I'll go straight back to you. So thank you everybody.
Stephen Mason's paper. Awesome.
Thank you everybody. I'm going to go to the woman in the black top. Sorry.
Pain and pleasure. Pain and lack of. So pain and pleasure.
Yeah. Carry on.
Yeah. Sorry.
He was getting confused. He's old.
I thought pain was pleasure.
Yeah.
You also established rape as an objectively bad thing.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. In South Africa,
Yeah.
in South Africa, men with HIV believe that if you have sex with a woman who is a virgin, you will be healed of that disease.
Yeah.
So,
Do you think that's true?
once you're justifying it in pain and gain, surely the gain from being healed of a disease that doesn't just kill you but tortures you, talking to you, is more than the pain from one day of rape. Because then you have to start justifying who's gaining more or losing more from this.
Yeah.
And where's the,
Sure.
also likely to just try and not insult our definition of the Bible, which is the New Testament and the Old Testament, and Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's so weird just giving examples.
Yeah, I don't think I haven't badmouthed anything.
I think she just means that you are refusing to look at some parts of the Bible and being quite selective. I think that's
what being selective. Surely, if it's God's word, all of it should be good.
Well, yeah, but
if I say you never said anything about rape, oh my God, that's a problem.
No, I'd like the yes side to have a sustained period of response now.
Yeah, please let me finish.
Thank you.
Okay.
What I was saying is that you are being selective in that you're only looking at what certain parts and not other parts. I'm not saying that it's not all true. I'm just saying that you should look at it all if you're going to quote
and some of
something.
it's bad.
Thank you. Do you have anything else to say, or would you like to hand back over to me?
You do, for example, have the notion in Christian theology of progressive revelation, and that later bits of revelation can abrogate earlier bits of revelation, and so on, and particularly when bringing in Jesus. Jesus says, you have heard it said, blah blah blah, but I say this, and it supersedes the Mosaic law and so on.
I call that, and so Justin Shiva calls that intercovenantal moral relativism, which is to say, oh look, this was bad in the Old Testament, but Jesus came along, and we've got different geographical, social cultural context, and suddenly it's good. Stoning of adulterers was bad, now we don't stone adulterers. Hang on, how does that work? That looks like moral relativism.
Yeah, and there's a big problem, like God could change his mind right now. Suddenly rape is fine, you don't know. You know what I mean? He's changed his mind before, he can change his mind again.
Nineveh. If you know your Bible, he changed his mind at Nineveh.
Exactly, changed his mind. And also, you know, the whole superseding thing doesn't even really make any sense.
Thank you.
Just because of Psalms, you know.
You'd just like to...
The word is true from the beginning, and every one of them...
A very quick response to the lady's question, and then we'll move on again.
What your position was quite a classic critique of consequentialism or utilitarianism, which quite often is seen in, say, this gentleman again, he walks into the hospital and the guy says, you look really healthy, I'm going to use you to save 5 other people, so I'm going to cut you up and you know, without, this will take a long time, but there are loads of defences of that, which is things like rule. If you look up consequentialism, say on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, you will see that actually there's about 20 different types of consequentialism. So it gets really, really complicated, but life is complicated. Right?
Thank you.
So you have rule, something like, the thing I'd say, rule consequentialism is one of them.
Okay.
A rule of thumb, which generally is going to...
We're going to take another question from you.
Something I was going to say was fine.
Thank you. The gentleman in the grey top.
Yeah, thank you. Just before I proceed to my question, I've seen some really strong pro and against. I want to come from a neutral sort of side of things. So I think what I want to see in the debate, I want to see really logical sort of going around what is true or not true. And I wouldn't expect to see criticism just to make one side being looking good. So my question to the opposition team, because I had the feeling that we're talking about 2 different goals in here, a different goal on the left-hand side, different goal on the right-hand side.
Are we?
Do you think that's the kind of probably ladies' mind? Do you think the opposition team has enough understanding of the proposition team's goal?
I used to be a Christian, mate.
Thank you.
To make this sort of, to talk from a both shoes and from a Christian decisions point of view.
We'll have a quick response.
I used to be a Christian since I was young, so you know I don't know what you're talking about. I definitely know the points they're raising. I definitely know the God they're talking about, and I definitely know my Bible. So.
Does the proposition team agree with that?
I'd just say 42,000 different denominations of Christianity. What you're doing is pointing out a very salient point that in fact there are as many gods as there are believers.
Yeah.
With the yes, I'd like to respond to that comment.
Again, you can. In our argument, we're appealing to a particular explanatory notion of a greatest possible being, personal being, grounding morality. It is possible to hold in common a belief in a greatest possible being, whilst, because of human fallibility, having some differences over particular values, having differences over whether you believe in a particular revelation or not, having differences on how you interpret different bits of those revelations. But I would say if it's possible for people within those overlapping interpretations to get things wrong, that's only possible because there's something there to get right. There's a fact of the matter to be got at. So bringing in moral fallibility highlights the reality of something objective that we're trying to get at, and that different people's theories can be closer to or further from, depending upon the facts of the matter.
Thank you. We're going to go back to the audience now.
Can I just one
very quick.
Peter, if an alien came down to Earth and fork-quibblexed you, or someone else, right, this gentleman there, fork-quibblexed him, right? Exactly. So,
no, what is fork?
No, exactly. So the fact is that if you're morally evaluating something, the first thing you will do in any sense of moral reasoning and moral psychology and moral philosophy is, well, what happened? What was the result of doing that? And all humans, we know all humans do this intuitively. That's how we moralise.
Thank you. Very quick response.
I think it's wrong to simply take into account the consequences of actions as consequentialism does. What about the intentionality of actions?
Absolutely, I agree with you, actually. Yeah,
I agree with that.
Excellent. But we'll go to the audience for another question first. The gentleman in the black jumper.
I can't be longer than the last question, but a lot of the discussion has been about the nature of God, God being good, God being just, whatever. To what extent can we fully understand, I guess, to the S camp, what it means to say God is good, God is just, if God is so separate from humanity, like omnipotence, omniscience?
To the yes side.
Sure. So I would say given the differences between God and us, if there is a God, we can't hope to comprehend the nature of God, but as we can hope to understand something of the nature of God, and to, as Aquinas talked about, see that there is at least an analogy and a similarity between God and us, particularly as beings made in his image, as we believe that there's a point of connection there, because God has created us and the world. But yes, we're finite and we're fallible, and there are evident difficulties in doing that. But again, in a sense, those difficulties and the importance of debating the differences and trying to get at the truth only highlights the fact that there's a truth that it really is important to try and get at.
Thank you. The no side?
So God, interestingly, cannot...
if he exists.
Yeah, if God exists, he cannot know that he's omniscient for a start, because you can't know that you don't know everything. And also, God, in the same way that we cannot, like true proper skepticism, we don't know that we're not a brain in a vat. God doesn't know that he's not a God in a vat and there's a God above him. It's literally epistemologically impossible for that to happen. So you've got this infinite regress of God. So some really interesting arguments around this. But also God cannot know, and we said this earlier and it's not really been answered, God cannot know that he's good. So in order for God to know he's good, he has to be able to have a sense of moral reasoning outside of his own just beingness in order to evaluate himself. We do it, and we're made in the image of God, supposedly. I morally evaluate myself by what I've done and the consequences that have pertained, from what I've done. So that makes perfect sense to me. It's grounded in reality, and I can test it scientifically, right? That God can't even do that, to me, makes God just incomprehensibly incoherent.
Thank you. We're running out of time, so we're going to have to...
I just wanted to...
Very quickly.
Yeah, I was just going to say that you were saying like God is incomprehensible and he's distant. Surely if he's all-powerful, he could make himself comprehensible.
Thank you. We're going to go back to the audience for a question. The lady at the back there in the black top. Who's right?
I think I got it here.
Several times.
Yeah. So one of the kind of the main examples that people generally give are Numbers 31, 17 to 18, where the Israelites are battling the Midianites, and they kill all the men, and they bring the women and the children, and Moses says to them, "What the hell are you doing?" I'm paraphrasing, by the way, he doesn't say that. But he's like, what are you doing? Why have you got the women and the children? Kill the children, kill all the women who have touched and slept with another man, and the little girls and shit, they're yours. Yeah? That's usually what people point to.
But also,
but I've got the Bible verse, so you can look it up yourself.
Also,
see if
the one where if a man rapes a woman, rather than saying he's bad, she has to force marry him.
Yeah.
Which actually still exists in certain cultures.
Yeah. And I just find it funny because
I would like to have...
it's never mentioned throughout the Bible, neither in the New Testament. Any rule about rape at all, it's not mentioned about those things.
So, a very quick response was that? No. So the yes side, what's your response to that point?
I think all these issues about bits of the Old Testament and so on aren't really on the topic of the debate tonight, which wasn't... is the biblical God is necessary for morality, but is a God necessary for morality?
He's a Christian.
We could take all evening debating the ins and outs of particular biblical passages if we do that. Let me just recommend to you, if that is an issue that weighs with you, one source to go to, which is Paul Copan's book, Is God a Moral Monster? By Paul Copan, which goes into a lot of the context of a lot of these Old Testament passages that people raise.
Can I recommend a fellow Christian called Tom Stark, who wrote the rejoinder to that, which is God a Moral Compromiser, and it's twice as big as Paul Copan's, and it totally destroys it. And he's a Christian.
Thank you.
Thon.
We've got time for 2 more questions if we're fairly quick. So everyone put your hands up if you've got a question. Let's go to the back actually. You said right at the back, green top.
Sure. Okay, that was a bit quiet, so I'll repeat the question in case other people didn't hear it. It's saying that surely within a process of natural selection, if certain moral behaviour helps the group to survive, when you'll survive, that'll spread due to natural selection, and so a Darwinian process can explain morality. But what that explains, granted that historical process, what it explains is the spread of certain behaviour patterns within the population. If you add a full stop to that explanation, that is in a sense an explaining away of morality rather than an explanation of it, because it still begs the further question: is that behaviour that is useful? Is it good? It can't be good and morally obligatory simply because it happens to be useful. You're then explaining away what is good in terms of, oh, it happened to be useful in your evolutionary past. So I don't think that's a good enough explanation. And an impersonal process, even if it happens somehow to arrive at behaviours that actually do match up to the way that you ought to behave. Well, what explains, again, the prescriptive and obligatory and ideal nature of that moral ought that your behaviour happens to comport with because of your history? So I think you don't need to deny that evolutionary story, but I don't think on its own it's enough to account for what we meet in moral experience.
Do you know what? I would actually agree. I would agree with Peter. Yeah, it's functional. So morality is functional in the evolutionary sense and biological and psychological sense per se. However, the difference between us and other animals is our awareness of others and our self-awareness and our empathy and intersubjectivity, which means that we can harness that and use logical reasoning and rationality. It's why you can't be moral without rationality and intention, and so all of these components are necessary for making a rounded moral creature. And so I actually kind of agree with Peter, to be honest, but I would add a lot to that then makes that process not a moral process, but allows us to arrive at a moral agency.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we've only got time for one more question before we go into closing statements. So,
David.
I'd
Okay.
like to direct this to Miriam if I can, if she wants to. We talked earlier, or you guys talked earlier about sort of basically discussing what is morality, what is good, and we talked about the axioms in which that rests, whether that's God or pain and pleasure, or the avoidance of pain and the gain of pleasure. I think the immediate question that should follow from that is, why should we be good? I think from the no side that's self-evident, because it's in our self-interest to gain pleasure and avoid pain. I was wondering why you think we should be good. What is the axiom on which...
Thank you. So yeah, why should we be good? The yes, sir.
Thanks for that question, David. Cool. Well, I'll just start by the axiom of the no side, which was pleasure and pain. And I think the case was made very well that is a fundamental problem of utilitarianism, is that if the rapist's pleasure overrides the pain of the person being raped, then pleasure and pain can't be all there is. And I think the axiom kind of falls on its face there. Lots of people have tweaked utilitarianism many times to kind of avoid it, but then you start invoking rules and laws, and then you get back to our question: why are those rules and laws? Why are they obligatory? Because you can't explain them away with pain and pleasure. Because somebody's pleasure may be at somebody else's expense, and it might cause them pain. And basically, what you've got with utilitarianism is one outweighs the other. And yeah, I didn't.
She's not a fan.
I'm not a fan of utilitarianism, but a lot of philosophers aren't.
What about third?
Why we should be good? Because we were created in a moral sphere in which it makes sense to be good.
But why? This is such a good question, and you really need to because actually what it comes down to is because heaven or because hell, and that is no good. That's like saying you should be good or you should be bad to avoid prison, or you should be good to
win the lottery.
Right?
So what John is saying there, surely, what he's saying is it's no good to try and ground morality simply in your self-interest because you want to gain or avoid certain ends. But their position is that morality is grounded in the self-interest of pain or pleasure. And I don't think there's nothing wrong with self-interest and morality aligning, but to ground
To
morality
incorporate.
fundamentally in self-interest.
You just deflected answering that question by applying it to myself. That's a two-cockroach fallacy. I need you, and he needs you, to answer why should you be good?
Because it's the right thing to. Because it's
why is it the right thing to do?
But that's asking the question. Why ought I to do what I ought to do?
It's
because you ought to do it.
Why?
There is no further why.
No, this is a problem with intrinsic. This is why deontology doesn't work. It's because deontology. So in a moral statement or in logic, you have an if and then statement, a protasis and apodosis. So what this is like, if you want this, then this should happen. And what he's doing is, then this should happen, then this should happen. But actually, morality is goal-oriented. So it's largely goal-orientated, which means that if I should fill my car with oil, sounds like that's a good idea. But if I'm a scientist who's testing whether car engines work well if you don't fill them with oil, then I shouldn't fill my car with oil. In other words, like my statement depends on the if part, and he's not coming up with the if part. He's just saying, "Be good, God, good God, good God, God, good." And I'm saying, if you want, I am grounding it in an axiom, if you want the world to be a better place where we have less pain and more pleasure for all of us, then bloody well be good.
Thank you. We'll have a response. We're going to have a response from the yes side, and then we're going to go into closing statements. So a very brief response, then closing statements.
But is the goal that the other side are pointing to simply a description of reality that you can take it or leave it, or something that is intrinsically good to aim at? Should you want your car to run? Is it just your subjective preference that you want to use the car in that particular way, or want to use human life in a particular way, use our existence in a particular way? Or is there actually a way in which you ought to use life and existence that you are objectively obligated to pursue?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Very interesting question time. So, without further ado, we move into our closing statements. Each side has a 7-minute closing statement.
I'll see you in the bar.
So I'd like to start with the no side, if they would like to give their 7-minute closing statement. Thank you very much.
Okay.
The no side.
Yes!
Take that, Peter. Thank you. 7 minutes. Off you go.
7 minutes, and me. Okay. All right. Now I'm really nervous. Yeah. Sorry.
That's page 1.
Yeah, that's page 1. Okay, so I think we've kind of pretty much established, and I would think proved, at least logically, or I think I proved, that you can talk about morals, you can even wonder where they come from without any appeal to God. In fact, we do this all the time. I would like to, in fact, just kind of have an example. We didn't really say this in the discussion, but generally when you try and teach people morality, and you even try and teach your children morality, you can do so without any appeal to God. And I find that kind of amazing if you really think about that, if you really think God is required for morality. You can say, it hurts, stop doing that, how would you feel if I did that to you? And they can understand that. The UN Charter has an entire charter on human rights, and they don't have a single mention of God, and it can be understood, it can be implied. The frameworks, in my opinion, are way better than the Bible. They address issues which are not addressed in the Bible. It's been found by experimental means, via Lawrence Kohlberg, that to have these kind of just rule-based beliefs are no good. That if you had a kid, you teach children why something is wrong and gave them reasons for it, they become better learners, they become more competent and better people than those that are just simply given random rules. Morality can be explained completely naturalistically, or they can be even explained supernaturally without any appeal to God, and of course we would prefer to explain them naturally. It definitely has some use for you, it has benefit for society, it's better for you. It can be explained completely with just an appeal to my emotions and my mental capacities that could have been, again, placed in me simply from natural selection and so on and so forth. So my feeling of empathy, my mental faculties of reason, my theorizing on the consequences of my actions, All of these that are present in everybody can explain where you get moral knowledge from. Peter in his online YouTube video uses the principle of credulity to explain moral reasoning, which is tantamount to saying, I know it's right because it feels right. I think our position can also use the principle of credulity and explain it in naturalistic terms without ever evoking a God. It seems to us that morality, again, this was raised by Jonathan here, is not something that is intrinsic in nature but intrinsic in the mind. So it's something like aesthetics, in that a painting has no actual beauty in it, but we project beauty on it. In the same way, a moral action is not intrinsically moral, but because of our own mental capacities and functions, we imprint morality onto it. Here are those amazing points that Jonathan, you've pretty much said most of my points. That's cool.
Awesome.
You're amazing. Yeah. So that morality presupposes atheism, with theodicies being used to explain by appeal to consequences that all evils are necessary in this world to bring about a better good. It doesn't really make sense why you should be moral in a world that is essentially planned out for you by an omnipotent God, because doing so, trying to stop evil in the world, surely would disrupt his plan, because that evil has some kind of purpose. So I think the Christian is at a loss on why he should even try and prevent evil in the world, and an atheist really is not. So I think also to hold these rules from either being a biblicalist or a Quranist or whatever, kind of stops morality from developing any further. If you kind of think that 2,000 years ago they had it all right and they had all these rules about what is moral, then we can't make any moral progress. There are many things that we've made progress in that are not to be found in the Bible, and they warrant explaining. So, such as democracy. Democracy not mentioned or condoned in the Bible, yet we all seem to think it's good. Rape is condemned in this modern society. Where is it mentioned in the Bible? Where is it condemned thusly? Slavery is condoned in every bit of the Bible. There is no condemnation of slavery, and yet we agree that it's bad. We've made moral progress.
It's countenance in the Bible.
Absolutely. Read the Bible.
You guys need to read your Bible.
Read the bloody Bible. God,
it was used for 2,000 years they generally use a curse of Ham, isn't it?
Yeah.
It was used by Christians to countenance, and it's interesting that you said, good people, moral people, stop slavery by doing X, Y, and Z. Well, actually, it was the Bible and divine revelation, progressive divine revelation, that obviously wasn't progressed enough.
Yeah. There were Christians on both sides of the debate, and they both used Bible verses.
Now, if God knew that was a revelation to humanity and still used that and produced that, knowing that it would be used to countenance slavery and to defend slavery, then that was a really weird decision to have that as a revelatory text. Sorry.
Yeah. So, and there are massive problems with divine command theory. There is no intrinsic value in love, kindness, or kindness, or any of the qualities of God. Just because they're associated with God is what makes them valuable. However, anything can be associated with God and suddenly it's valuable. He could overnight, part of his quality could be to be hateful or to be a liar or whatever, and that would just be valuable, that would be right. It also just doesn't make sense how we usually think about morality. So, when somebody is drowning in front of you or being murdered and stabbed, you don't have to flick through your Bible to work out if it's a bad deed.
I don't know of anyone who does that.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point. We have the capacity to work out what is moral naturally.
Well, we don't deny that.
Yeah.
We all agree on this panel that we can use our rationality to get some basic moral truths.
And that's great. And I heard that what you said, but you don't need to appeal to a God to write that on your heart.
And to ground it.
Yeah, and to
ground that in the fact that, you know what, it harms someone else.
Exactly. And that feels bad to me.
It feels
because I'm empathetic.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I
don't need to ground it in anything else.
No, you have just under a minute left.
Oh, okay. I'll just try and round it up, I guess.
So can I just say Larry Nucci's point?
I've got the Larry Nucci thing here, but you carry on.
Larry Nucci did a test on Amish teenagers, and they said they used divine command theory and said, well, God is good, and so we know that don't hit people because God says don't hit people, so we don't do that. And Larry Nucci said, well, what if God didn't make a comment about don't hit people? And they all went, we wouldn't hit people, it's still immoral. In other words, people who are divine command theorists always still defer to consequentialism, naturalism, and ethic. So it really doesn't matter whether you have some objective morality out here, because we're all subjectively interpreting it anyway, and we actually pragmatically use consequentialism to ground our own morality on a daily basis. You'll do it tonight, all of you.
Yeah. I'd like to thank the thsi for their excellent closing statements. Miriam and Peter, you have 7 minutes to close your arguments.
Thank you very much. I think it's really important to keep in mind this distinction between epistemology and ontology, that is, between how we come to know moral facts, how we make moral judgments and so on, and whether or not there is something out there that we're discovering, that we get right in our moral judgments according to the facts of the matter. As Miriam says, there's no controversy on this panel about the fact that we can all do moral reasoning and that even grant that consequentialism is at least part of the way in which we do moral reasoning to discover what the moral facts of the matter may be. The question is, how do you explain the existence of those moral facts and the objective incumbency, the prescriptive and obligatory and ideal nature of those facts that we discover? Accepting that consequences can sometimes justify permitting particular evils, for example, doesn't mean endorsing consequentialism in the sense of thinking that the value of an action is wholly derived from or constituted by its consequences. It doesn't mean endorsing consequentialism as a moral ontology as opposed to epistemology. The consequences of an action must be judged, can be judged to be good or bad by some transcendent standard. Even if God on occasion uses the consequences of an action to justify that in terms of greater good theodicy, that doesn't mean that God is a consequentialist. Good consequences aren't necessarily sufficient to justify just any act on God's part. I.e., outweighing goods must be at least consistent with God's character. And what about intentions? As well, we mentioned, John O. granted earlier that intentions do matter in morality, but how does consequentialism fit those in? Also, it's not necessarily the case, I think, that when there's an evil, God has to have some outweighing good. I would appeal to Peter van den Wegen's argument against one of the other premises of the evidentialist moral argument, pointing out the inevitable vagueness of allowing certain amounts of evil for certain amounts of end. So I think it is possible for the theist to grant that there can be some degree of gratuitous evil in reality. God is the greatest possible being, I think, who gives an adequate grounding to morality. Just necessarily speaking, consequentialism has problems, whether as an epistemology or certainly as an ontology, for explaining values. Doesn't consequentialism entail that actions have no moral value until they have consequences? And no determinate value, therefore, until all of the consequences of an action have occurred. But when have all of the consequences of an action ever occurred? Is that at all coherent? How do you choose between different versions of, say, utilitarianism, hedonism, etc.? So we said there's a lot on the table out there. Is one objectively obligated to promote certain consequences? How do consequences explain the prescriptive and obligatory nature of morality, of moral duties? Do intentions and character count? John admits that they do. Consequences for who? We have this issue. Is it for the majority? Well then, what about what happens to minority rights under consequentialism? For consequentialism, the end would always seem automatically to justify the means. But what about the common sense notion and phrase, well, the end doesn't always justify the means? So I think if God is there, that gives a better grounding for morality. It's greater to be the paradigm of goodness than to conform to it. God doesn't just conform to goodness, he is goodness. When you get to God, you've reached a metaphysical and moral ultimate, an axiom if you like, the explanatory stopping point. But that doesn't mean you can't explain or unpack what goodness is or wherein the goodness of God consists. You can still explain that God is loving, kind, merciful, etc. By nature, but that would be an explanation of what the nature of morality is, not an explanation of why morality is good, as it were. So we come back to the moral argument. They appeal to the possibility of Platonism, but that's to invoke abstract objects which are difficult in and of themselves and can't really explain the personal nature of morality, neither the prescriptive nor the obligatory content. And it would also be to invoke a huge cosmic coincidence that there are, in reality, these necessarily existing abstract forms of justice and love and so on that just somehow exist in this somehow non-personal realm of reality. And then, by good fortune, human beings capable of moral reasoning and working out that love is a good thing happen to evolve on this particular planet. That seems to be a huge coincidence to invoke, which would be much more economically explained by saying that there's a personal creator of the world who intended it for there to be moral beings such as ourselves who can know about the morality that's grounded in his character. So I'd just like to end with a quote from the Welsh philosopher H.P. Owen, which for me summarises quite neatly the nub of the moral argument. It says, on the one hand, objective moral claims clearly transcend every human person and culture, because people and cultures can get morality wrong. But on the other hand, it's contradictory to assert that impersonal, non-personal claims are entitled to the allegiance of our wills. The only solution to this paradox, says Owen, is to suppose that the order of objective moral claims is in fact rooted in the personality of God. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
A 5-minute rebuttal.
20 minutes.
Thank you very much to all of the speakers, Miriam, Peter, Jonathan and Boaz. And thank you to all of you guys who turned up today and asked all of the questions. I thought it was a really interesting discussion, so thank you very much. Would Charlie and David like to make some closing remarks and some notices?
You left it right to the end to do a bunch of stuff on consequences. The old trick.
I just want to say thank you again for coming. I think the Atheist Society, assuming there's nothing going on in the bridge, I don't know if anyone knows if there's anything going on in the bridge tonight. No, okay then. I think the Atheist Society might be heading to the bridge afterwards for some drinks.
Right!
Yeah, if you want.
No, there's way more of you.
Huge thank you again to our chairperson.
We'll use our reason.
I can only say the same thing again. Thanks to everyone for coming. Thanks to speakers. I think it's been great. They've all been really, really great, haven't they? And some good questions as well. So thank you all for coming. As we said, the next 2 weeks maybe of more interest to you. I think the question that really came out in the Q&A session is, to me, seemed to be, is God good? So actually, maybe unpacking who this God is next week might be something you're interested in doing. And that's why we're holding all these events, or the following week, your recent week. But thanks for coming. Thank you very much, Bradley. Thank you. Have a good evening when the fight continues in the bridge.
You might want to ask yourselves one final question, and why is it good that at least one of you might buy me a pint? Why is that good? Because I think that's good.
Yeah.
No one else does.
I must say.